The heavy oak door of St. Clara's orphanage shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. It wasn't just a door closing. It was the sound of my entire world shrinking to the cloth bag in my hand and the 3 copper coins in my pocket. 22 years. 22 years of gray porridge, narrow cots, and the quiet loneliness of being no one's child. And now, simply nothing. No farewell, no blessing, just the weary voice of the Mother Superiors saying I was too old, that the space was needed for younger children. My own path, she'd said. I looked at the dirt road ahead, twisting away into the gloomy, mist-wreathed forest. Which path? I didn't even know where to go. I was just Ilara. No surname, no history. A ghost before I'd even begun to live. The village at the edge of the forest was a place of muted colors and hushed voices. People here didn't laugh, they endured. As I sat by the old well, hunger a sharp knot in my stomach, I heard the whispers. They drifted over from 2 women drawing water, their words slicing through the quiet afternoon. They're hiring at the Ironwood Keep, you know, the Alpha King's fortress. My head lifted. Work? Silver coins, they say, for kitchen hands, laundresses. The other woman snorted, a harsh, dry sound. Silver's no use to a corpse. You know what they say about that place, about him, King Alden. They say the fortress howls at night. They say he's more beast than man, cursed. People who go up that mountain road, some don't come back down. A shiver, cold and slick, traced my spine. The Alpha King. We heard tales, of course, shapeshifters, wolves who walked as men, ruling their territories with primal power. The kingdom of Ironwood was the most feared, a realm of dark pines and sharp peaks, ruled from a fortress of black stone. King Alden Valerius was a name spoken in low tones, a legend wrapped in shadow and warning. But then I looked at my 3 copper coins. I thought of the empty road, the coming winter, the hollow ache of having nowhere to belong. What did I have to lose? My life was already a whisper. Perhaps in a place of shadows, I could finally become real. I found my feet and approached the women. My voice was barely more than a rustle of leaves. Excuse me, where would one go to apply for this work? They turned, their eyes sweeping over my worn dress, my thin frame, with a mixture of pity and caution. The older one, face lined like old leather, studied me. Are you serious, child? You look like a strong wind would carry you off. I am stronger than I look, I said, and the words felt true in a way little else did. I need the work. She exchanged a long look with her companion, then sighed. Very well, if you're determined to walk towards the storm, go to the Crossroads Inn, a day's walk east. The keep's steward, Lady Vivienne, will be there at dawn tomorrow, choosing girls. But mark my words, some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I thanked her, the words tasting of dust and hope. The next morning, in the cramped, smoky common room of the Crossroads Inn, I stood among a dozen other women. The air was thick with fear and desperation. When the door opened, silence fell like a blow. Lady Vivienne entered, and the room seemed to grow colder. She was tall, elegant, severe, her black hair a flawless cascade over her shoulders, her eyes the color of frozen slate. They cut through the dim light, assessing, dismissing. I am Lady Vivienne, steward of Ironwood Keep, she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. You will work hard, you will be silent, and you will obey without question. The pay is in silver. The penalty for failure is removal. One by one, she passed us. When her gaze fell on me, I felt skinned alive. Name. Ilara. Surname: I have none, my lady. I come from St. Clara's. A flitter of something, perhaps disdain, crossed her perfect features. Age, skills: 22. I can cook, clean, mend, and follow instructions. I can read a little. Her icy eyes held mine for an eternity. You look fragile. The keep is no place for the frail. I am resilient, my lady. I didn't know where the word came from, but it felt like a shield. I will not break. Something in her expression shifted, minutely. Not approval, but a kind of cold calculation. Very well, Ilara. You are hired. Present yourself at the keep's postern gate at first light. Bring nothing but the clothes on your back. The following dawn I stood before Ironwood Keep, and my breath vanished. It wasn't a castle. It was a mountain itself, carved into a fortress. Towers of dark granite clawed at a brooding sky. Banners, black as a moonless night and emblazoned with a single silver wolf's head, snapped in the bitter wind. The air itself tasted of pine, frost, and a deep, wild power that hummed against my skin. I was led with 5 others through massive gates that groaned like living things, across courtyards paved with slick black stone, and into the belly of the beast. Our quarters were a stark, narrow dormitory in the servants' wing. The rules were laid out by a grim-faced guardsman. Work is from bell to bell. Meals are in the kitchen. You do not wander. You do not speak to the nobility. And you never, his voice dropped, approach the king's private towers. His Majesty's affliction requires solitude. Disturb him, and you will regret it. Affliction. The word hung in the cold air. It explained the bundles of rare, bitter-smelling herbs I sometimes saw being carried by grim-faced healers up the main staircase. It explained the heavy, sorrowful silence that clung to the upper corridors like frost. Weeks bled into months. My world became the steaming heat of the kitchens, the endless piles of laundry, the ache in my bones from scrubbing stone floors. I was invisible, a ghost in a house of shadows. And I never saw the king. He was a phantom, a rumor, a curse given a name. But I felt him. Sometimes, late at night, a sound would shudder through the very stones of the keep, a deep, muffled, tormented sound that was neither fully human nor fully animal. It was the sound of something in profound agony, and it made my soul ache in a way I couldn't explain. The other servants would cross themselves or whisper prayers, their faces pale. I would just stop, my hand going to my chest, feeling a strange, resonant pull, as if that cry of pain was echoing inside my own hollow spaces. Then came the night of the blood moon. The whispers in the kitchen were frantic, terrified. "It's the anniversary," an old cook muttered, her hands shaking as she chopped herbs. "The curse is strongest tonight. May the goddess protect us all." The great hall held a feast, lavish and loud, but it was a facade. The king's chair at the high table remained empty, a throne of shadows. The real activity was upstairs, the sound of heavy boots, the clank of metal, hushed, urgent orders. I worked late, clearing the monumental aftermath of the pointless banquet. By the time I finished, the keep was a tomb. The feast was over, the nobles retired, the servants fled to their quarters. Silence, thick and heavy, pressed down. And then it came. Not a distant shudder this time, but a roar that ripped through the silence from the floors above. A roar of raw, shattered anguish, followed by the deafening crash of splintering wood and shattering glass. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to be the ghost I was supposed to be. But another instinct, older and deeper, rooted me to the spot. That wasn't just the sound of a beast or a curse. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two. Someone was drowning in agony, alone in the dark. I don't remember deciding to move. My feet simply carried me past the empty guards posts, up the forbidden spiral staircase, towards the source of the pain. The air grew colder, thicker, charged with a wild, unstable energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I reached a long, torch-lit corridor. At its end were towering double doors of black oak. From behind them, the sounds were chaos, guttural growls, tearing fabric, the wrenching scream of metal being twisted. I should have turned back. I knew I should have. But I took another step forward, drawn by a compulsion I could no more resist than I could stop my own heart. And that's when I heard it. A sudden, absolute silence from behind the doors. A silence more terrifying than any roar. It was the sound of a predator catching a scent. A soft click to my left. A hidden panel in the wall slid open. And there he was. King Alden Valerius filled the space, a monument of barely restrained power and suffering. He was shirtless, his torso a landscape of tense muscle and old scars, gleaming with sweat. His hair, the color of winter wheat, was wild around a face of sharp, brutal angles. But his eyes, they were the heart of a blizzard, a luminous, furious gold, and they were locked on me. He was caught between forms, claws, sharp and black, extended and retracted from his fingertips in a painful, rhythmic pulse. The bones in his face seemed to shift under his skin. He was a tempest given flesh.
I was frozen,
a king imprisoned in his own breaking body.
I couldn't breathe. He took a shuddering step forward, his gaze not just seeing me, but inhaling me. His nostrils flared, and the wild fury in his eyes flickered, fractured by a shock so profound it was like watching a star explode in the depths of a frozen sea. His voice, when it came, was a ragged, broken thing, sandpaper and thunder. You! It was all he managed before a fresh wave of agony convulsed through him. He snarled, doubling over, claws digging into his own palms. The curse was reclaiming him, pulling him back into the maelstrom. And without thinking, driven by that same deep, inexplicable pull, I did the only thing that made sense. I took a step towards the storm. "Stop," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You have to stop fighting it." His blazing gold eyes snapped to mine, wide with disbelief and pain. I took another step, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The pain, you're making it worse by fighting it. You have to let it be." I didn't know what I was saying. I had no knowledge of curses or wolves. I only knew the truth of his suffering and the strange, calm certainty rising in me like a tide. Slowly, trembling, I raised my hand, palm open and empty. A gesture of peace, a gesture of offering. He stared at my hand as if it were a miracle, a blasphemy, a lifeline. The violent tremors racking his body began to slow. The claws slowly retracted. The wild light in his eyes softened, not to something human, but to something aware, present. The terrifying, fractured energy in the corridor began to settle, like dust after an explosion. He took one last staggering step until he was close enough for me to feel the heat radiating from him, to smell pine and snow and a wild, deep earth scent. He looked down at me, this colossal, broken king, and in his eyes I saw not a monster, but a man who had been alone in the dark for a very, very long time. His voice was a hoarse whisper, filled with a wonder that bordered on terror. "What are you?" The silence that followed his question was louder than any roar. It pulsed in the space between us, filled with the residual echo of his pain and the shocking, impossible calm that had followed my touchless gesture. He just stared, those blizzard gold eyes tracing my face as if memorizing the lines of a long-lost map. I had no answer for him. What was I? I was Ilara, no one, a a servant with empty hands and a heart that now beat a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. "I'm no one," I whispered, the truth falling from my lips. "Just a servant from the kitchens." "No." The word was a soft growl, but it held no threat. It held certainty. "No, you are not no one. The curse, it has never stopped." He looked at his own hands, now fully human, the claws gone. He flexed his fingers, a look of profound disbelief softening the harsh angles of his face. "For one night each year since I was born, I become a prisoner in my own flesh. The wolf and the man wage war, and I am the battlefield. No healer, no witch, no potion has ever brought more than a moment's respite. Yet you stand there, and the war ceases." He took a slow, careful step closer, and I held my ground, though every instinct sang with a primal warning. This was the Alpha King, the feared beast of Ironwood, but the man before me now seemed shattered, not by weakness, but by a revelation. "Your scent. I smelled it before I saw you. Not fear, not the sharp tang of the herbs they burned to try and soothe me. It was clear water, sunlight on old stone, something ancient and quiet." He reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air between us. It was a gesture of astonishing hesitation from a being of pure command. "May I?" I didn't understand what he was asking, but I gave a tiny, jerky nod. His fingertips, calloused and warm, brushed ever so lightly against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. At the contact, a jolt went through me, not of fear, but of recognition. A deep, resonant chord struck somewhere in the core of my being. His eyes widened, and I knew he felt it too. "Healer's blood," he breathed, the words filled with awe. "The legends are true. The old tales say a curse born of vengeance can only be undone by a heart born of mercy, a true healer spirit." "I'm not a healer," I protested, my voice trembling. "I can't even mend a torn apron properly."
"It is not a skill, Alara." He said my name, and it sounded like a prayer on his lips. "It is a birthright, a legacy in your veins. Your presence, your very essence, is a balm." He finally looked away from me, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of the antechamber, visible through the open hidden door, the overturned table, the shredded tapestries, the deep gouges in the stone walls. A shadow of shame crossed his features. "This is what I become, what I have always become, until tonight." He turned back to me, and the intensity in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "You have given me a night of peace, a gift beyond any kingdom. Please, will you sit? Just for a moment. I do not wish the silence to end." It was a plea from a king. It undid me. I nodded again, and he led me, not with a command, but with a gentle hand at the small of my back, through the hidden door and into his private chamber. The room was a reflection of the antechamber's violence, but older, more entrenched. Books lay scattered, their pages torn. A heavy chair was snapped in two. But amidst the chaos, there was a large fireplace with dying embers and two high-backed chairs that had been spared. He guided me to one, then sank into the other, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He looked exhausted, but the terrifying, fractured energy was gone. "Tell me of yourself," he said, his voice softer now. "Where do you come from?" And so, in the quiet of that shattered room, with the King of Ironwood hanging on my every word, I told him my nothing story. The orphanage, the gray years, the 3 copper coins, the decision to walk towards the rumored storm of Ironwood Keep. He listened, not as a lord hearing a servant's tale, but as a man starved for a genuine connection. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. I, too, know something of being an orphan, he said, staring into the embers. My parents, the curse took them from me long before they died. My father, consumed by finding a cure, grew distant and cold. My mother, she looked at me, her own son, and saw only the monster I would become. She left the keep when I was 10. I never saw her again. He looked at me, his golden eyes stark with a loneliness I knew all too well. A king can have 1,000 subjects and still rule over a desert. My heart ached for him. His was a gilded cage, mine a barren one, but we were both prisoners of circumstance. The curse, what is its nature? Who would do such a thing? His jaw tightened. Morgana, a seer witch of the old forests. My grandfather had her brother executed for practicing forbidden magic that cost lives. She swore vengeance not on him, but on his bloodline. On the day of my birth, she infiltrated the celebration and cast her spell. "You will be a king divided," she said. "Wolf against man, man against wolf. Every year on this night, the division will tear at you. And on the year you turn 33, if your other half, your destined balance, has not found you and claimed the healer mantle, the divide will become permanent. The wolf will consume the man, forever." A chill colder than the mountain air seeped into my bones. 33? How long? "I have 1 year," he said, the words flat, final. 1 year from tonight. The magnitude of it crashed over me. This mighty king, this powerful alpha, was living under a death sentence, and he believed I was the key to stopping it. The pressure was immense, terrifying. "But I don't know how to claim any mantle," I said, my voice rising in panic. I felt something, a pull to help, a need to calm the storm. But that's all. I'm not a savior. I'm just Elara. "Just Elara," he repeated, and a faint, weary smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the severity, revealing the handsome, weary man beneath the crown of thorns. Elara, who walked into the heart of a legend's pain when everyone else fled. Elara, whose quiet spirit did what armies of mages could not. Do not discount the power of just. It is often the only thing that is true. The first faint hints of dawn began to bleed through the high, narrow windows, painting the destruction in shades of gray and silver. The night was over. The world outside this broken room was about to wake up. A sudden, sharp awareness of our positions jolted through me. I was a servant, alone in the king's bedchamber at dawn. However pure our interaction, however profound the connection, the world would not see it that way. Lady Vivian's icy warning echoed in my memory. The penalty for failure is removal. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the stone floor. I have to go. The kitchen bell. They'll notice I'm gone." Alden stood as well, his movements fluid and controlled now. The king was reasserting himself, but the man I had glimpsed remained in his eyes. Of course, he didn't try to stop me, but he moved between me and the hidden door. "Elara, what happened tonight, it changes everything. For me, for the kingdom, but I understand the dangers for you. Go, be discreet, but know this." He stepped closer, and the sheer intensity of his presence stole the air from my lungs. "You are under my protection now. From this moment forward, you are not just a servant. You are a guest in my house, a friend, and perhaps much more." The words were a promise and a threat, a sanctuary and a cage. I could only nod, my throat too tight for speech. He opened the hidden door for me. "Go. I will find a way to see you again, safely."
I slipped back into the cold corridor, the stone biting through my thin shoes. As I hurried towards the servants' stairs, the gravity of the night pressed down on me. I had touched a mystery far greater than myself. I had soothed a king's cursed soul, and in doing so, I had stepped out of the shadows and into a light I was not prepared for. I made it back to the dormitory just as the other servants were stirring. I fell into my cot, pulling the thin blanket over my head, my mind a whirlwind. His words played on a loop: healer's blood, destined balance, 1 year, and underneath it all, a warmer, more terrifying thread, the look in his eyes when he said perhaps much more. The next days were a strange, tense parody of normality. I scrubbed pots, I peeled vegetables, I swept floors, but everything was different. The stones of the keep seemed to hold a secret. The air whispered with a new energy, and I was constantly, acutely aware of the unseen eyes that might now be upon me. Lady Vivian's presence became a cold spot in every room she entered. Her slate-gray eyes seemed to linger on me longer than necessary, her perfect mouth a thin, disapproving line. Had she heard something? Did she sense a change? 3 days after the blood moon, a messenger in the king's livery found me in the vegetable cellar, elbow deep in turnips. "Ilara?" he asked, his tone respectful, not the usual bark used for servants. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. "Yes?" "His Majesty requests your presence in the West Library at your earliest convenience." He bowed slightly and left, leaving me standing in the dim cellar, my hands covered in dirt, my mind reeling. At your earliest convenience. A king did not make requests of scullery maids. He commanded. This was a signal, a test, perhaps. I washed my hands and face, smoothed my worn dress, and with a heart hammering a frantic tattoo, I made my way to the West Library, a place I had only ever dusted under the stern supervision of the head housekeeper. The room was a cavern of knowledge, smelling of old paper, leather, and beeswax. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust. And there, by a large oak table strewn with ancient open volumes, stood King Alden. He was dressed simply in a dark tunic and trousers, no crown, no robes of state. He looked like a scholar, albeit a fiercely powerful one. When he saw me, the intense focus on his face softened. "Ilara, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Please." I sat, perching on the edge, painfully aware of the gulf between us. "I have been researching," he began, tapping a page of dense, spidery script. "The lore on healer bloodlines is fragmented, deliberately obscured during the purges centuries ago. But the patterns are there: enhanced empathy, an affinity for living things, especially plants, a calming aura that can soothe not just physical pain, but spiritual turmoil." I thought of the orphanage garden, the tiny plot I tended where flowers always bloomed brighter, of the injured bird I'd nursed back to health as a child, of the way the kitchen cats, usually skittish, would curl up near my feet. "It sounds familiar," I admitted hesitantly. He leaned forward, his eyes alight. "I knew it. The connection you felt, the peace you brought, it was no accident. Your lineage is the key, Ilara, not just to my curse, but to something greater." He pushed a particularly old leather-bound book towards me. It was written in a language I couldn't read, but on the open page was an illuminated illustration, a woman with a glowing hand, calming a great, snarling wolf made of shadow. "The Healer and the Beast, an old parable. I always thought it was myth. Now, I believe it is prophecy." The word sent a shiver through me. "Your Majesty, this is too much. I am just—" "Do not say 'just' again," he said, but his voice was gentle. "You are Ilara, and you are here. That is the first and most important fact." He sighed, leaning back.
But you are right to be cautious. The court is a nest of vipers. My condition has made my throne precarious. There are those who would use any weakness against me. Your presence, our connection, must be protected. For now, you will remain in the servants' wing, but I am assigning you new duties." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, polished wooden token carved with the same wolf's head sigil. "From today, you are a scribe's assistant in the royal archives. It is a quiet, solitary post. No one will question it. It will give you access to these books, to knowledge, and it will give me a reason to see you, to speak with you, without raising suspicion." He placed the token in my hand. It was warm from his skin. It felt like a key to a door I hadn't known existed. "Study, Alara. Learn, not for me, but for yourself. Discover who you are, because I believe you are the other half of the equation, not just a healer for my curse, but the balance my soul has been seeking." The conviction in his voice was a physical force. It promised a destiny, a purpose. It was terrifying and beautiful. As I left the library, the token clutched tightly in my hand, I felt the walls of my old life crumbling. I was no longer just an orphan, just a servant. I was Alara, with healer's blood, holding a king's fate and my own mysterious future in my uncertain hands. And from the shadowed archway at the end of the corridor, a pair of cold, slate-gray eyes watched me go, narrowing into slits of calculating ice. The royal archives were a world deeper than the kitchens, quieter than the courtyards, a hushed, hallowed space where time seemed to gather dust on endless rows of leather-bound spines. My new post as scribe's assistant to an elderly, near-silent man named Fenwick was a sanctuary of sorts. Here, no one demanded I scrub floors or haul water. My duty was to fetch volumes, prepare ink, and gently clean fragile pages with a soft brush. It was peaceful. It was also a perfect cage of observation. The token King Alden had given me was a passport. The guards at the archive's doors, who would have barred a kitchen maid, merely nodded at the sight of the carved wolf head. But I felt their eyes on my back, speculative and sharp. Word traveled in a fortress like Ironwood, especially a change as odd as a scullery maid being elevated to the archives. The silence here wasn't just the absence of sound, it was thick with unasked questions. My first task from Master Fenwick was to reorganize a section on medicinal botany. My hands, red and rough from lye soap, trembled as I touched vellum pages illustrating moonbells and shadowroot. The drawings seemed to pulse with familiarity that made my head swim. I could almost smell the plants through the parchment. As I worked, sorting, cleaning, I began to read. Not just the words, but the spaces between them. I learned of the healer clans, families gifted with an innate connection to life force, who served as peacemakers between humans and wolfkind in ancient times. They were revered, then they were feared, then they were hunted to near extinction during the purges centuries ago. "Their blood holds the calm to the storm," whispered one fragmented scroll. "Their spirit is the bridge between the divided self." Every line felt like a reflection in a darkened mirror. Is this what Alden saw? A bridge? The thought was dizzying. He visited on the third day. He did not sweep in as the king, but entered with a scholar's quiet step, exchanging a murmured word with Master Fenwick, who bowed deeply and retreated to his private nook. Alden came to stand beside the table where I was carefully copying a damaged herbal. "You look at home here," he said, his voice low, meant only for me. I started, a drop of ink falling to blot the parchment. I feel like I'm deciphering a dream I didn't know I had." He leaned over, his shoulder nearly brushing mine, to look at the page. His presence was a warm, solid force in the cool, dusty air. "The dream is your inheritance, Alara. Do you see this?" He pointed to a symbol in the margin of the ancient text, a circle intersected by a wavy line. "The healer's mark.
It was said to appear on the skin of true lineage during times of great emotional flux, or when in the presence of their counterpart. I instinctively rubbed the inside of my left wrist, where a faint silvery mark like a crescent moon crossing a small circle had always been. I'd thought it a birthmark, a nothing. I hid my hand under the table. It's just legends. Legends are truths waiting for their moment, he replied, his golden eyes intent on my face. He didn't press. Instead, he pulled a small, cloth-wrapped bundle from his pocket and laid it on the table. I brought you something. I unwrapped it to find a set of fine, new quills, a pot of high-quality ink, and a stack of clean, smooth parchment. Tools for a scholar, not a servant. The kindness of it, the sheer seeing of me, brought a tightness to my throat. Your Majesty, I cannot. You can, softly he interrupted. And please, when we are alone like this, call me Alden. To speak his name felt more intimate than any touch could have. It was a surrender to the impossible connection growing between us. I could only nod, my fingers tracing the fine grain of the parchment. Study this, he said, tapping the book before me. There is a tale of a healer who ended a war between two packs not by force, but by understanding the root of their rage, which was a poison spring. She cleansed the water, and the wolves' minds cleared. He looked at me, and the weight in his gaze was immense. My curse is a poisoned spring in my soul, Ilara. Morgana's vengeance twisted something fundamental. Your gift, your presence, begins the cleansing. I have not had a single moment of the internal fraying that usually follows the blood moon. The peace you gave me lingers. Hope, bright and terrifying, flickered in my chest. Then there is a chance? He said, there is you. Simply. And in those two words, I felt the weight of a kingdom's hope and the tender grip of a man clinging to a lifeline. Our meetings in the archives became a secret rhythm in my new life. He would come, always with a pretext, a question about a historical date, a need for a specific map, and we would talk. He told me of the burdens of rule, the constant political games of the court, the loneliness of command. I told him of small things, the way the morning light hit the high windows of the archive, the stubborn fox that stole kitchen scraps, the melodies of old songs the orphanage children used to sing. In that dusty, sunlit room, the titles fell away. He was Alden, a man scarred by a fate he didn't choose, and I was Ilara, a woman discovering she might be more than the sum of her losses. But the outside world was not the archives. In the servants' hall, the atmosphere had shifted. The friendly, if distant, indifference was gone. Now I was met with averted eyes and hushed conversations that stopped when I entered. I was an anomaly, and in a place ruled by strict order, anomalies are either worshipped or destroyed. I was not being worshipped. The cold point of this new reality was Lady Vivian. She seemed to be everywhere I least wanted her, in the corridor leading to the archives, taking the air in a courtyard I crossed. Her gaze was a physical chill. One afternoon, she intercepted me as I carried a stack of books back from the library. Ilara, is it? Her voice was like oiled silk, smooth and dangerous. Yes, my lady? I hear you have found favor in the archives, a curious posting for one with your background. Her eyes, the color of a winter grave, scanned me from head to toe, missing nothing. Tell me, do you find the work illuminating? Every instinct screamed to hide, to deflect, but something in me, perhaps the new, fragile confidence Alden's belief had sparked, made me lift my chin. I find it peaceful, my lady. There is much to learn. A thin, humorless smile touched her lips. Knowledge is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. It can give ideas above one's station. She took a step closer, and the scent of her frost and expensive bitter perfume made my nose wrinkle. The king is a noble soul, burdened by a great tragedy. He has a tender heart for strays, for broken things. It is a commendable quality in a ruler, but it can lead to misplaced attachments. Do you understand me?
The threat was velvet wrapped, but its edges were razor sharp. I understood perfectly. She saw me as a stray Alden had picked up, an attachment to be severed. I understand my place is to serve the keep, my lady, I said, keeping my voice flat, neutral. See that you remember it. Her smile vanished. Serve, do not presume. The archives are a place of silent record, not ambition. Ensure your presence there remains equally silent. She swept away, leaving me trembling against the cold stone wall, the books heavy in my arms. Her warning was clear: stay in the shadows or be removed from them permanently. That night, the dream came. Not a dream of flowers or calm, but of running through a dark forest, the sound of monstrous howls and rending trees at my back. I was not myself. I was a woman with hair like river silver, clutching a bundled blanket to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled towards the faint lights of a building, the orphanage. She pressed a desperate kiss to the bundle, tucked a small embroidered handkerchief inside, and laid it on the frost-covered step. As she turned to flee, a shadow detached itself from the trees, a wolf with eyes of molten gold. Not Alden's. These were older, furious, hungry. The woman raised a hand, and a pulse of soft silver light flared from her palm, throwing the wolf back with a snarl. Then she vanished into the night. I woke with a gasp, my own hand pressed to my hammering heart. The image was seared behind my eyes, the woman's face etched with love and terror. The handkerchief, my handkerchief, the one with the initials E.E. I'd left behind in Alden's chamber. A memory or a prophecy, a message in my blood? The next day, I was a ghost of myself, moving through my duties in a daze. When Alden found me in the archives, I was staring blankly at a page, seeing not words but that desperate silver-haired face. Alara, his voice was laced with immediate concern. He dismissed Master Fenwick with a look. What is it? You're pale as moonlight. The words tumbled out. The dream, the woman, the wolf, the handkerchief. As I described the silver light from her hand, I unconsciously rubbed my own palm. Alden listened, his expression growing graver with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. You dreamt of your mother, he said, sure. A memory passed through blood. The wolf, it was a hunter, from one of the noble families that led the purges. They wanted the healer lines extinguished. He reached out, his hand hovering over mine where I rubbed my palm. May I? I nodded. He took my hand in his, turning it over. His touch was warm, grounding. He steadied my palm, his thumb brushing over the center. A jolt, not of pain, but of recognition, passed between us. The power is there, Alara, dormant but present. Your mother used hers to protect you, to give you a chance at a life she could not have. She hid you in the most anonymous place she could find. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. It was one thing to be an orphan. It was another to know you had been loved enough to be abandoned, to be a secret worth dying for. The handkerchief, I whispered. It's the only clue. I left it. It is safe, he assured me. I have it. The initials E.E. Alara Ellsworth, perhaps. We will find the truth, together. The word together felt like a shield, but as I looked into his determined face, the cold voice of Lady Vivian whispered in my memory, misplaced attachments. A sudden sharp commotion echoed from the main corridor outside the archives, shouted orders, the clatter of armored feet. Alden's head snapped up, his body tensing, the king instantly reclaiming him. Master Fenwick scurried in, his face ashen. Your Majesty, riders from the southern border, they bear the sigil of the Mordred pack. A shadow passed over Alden, dark and grim. Kaelin, he muttered, the name a curse. He released my hand, the warmth vanishing.
He turned to me, his eyes holding a storm of apology and urgency. "Stay here. Stay safe. Do not wander." He strode from the archives, a wave of unleashed authority flowing before him. I stood alone amidst the silent books, the dream of my mother's flight still vivid in my mind, the warmth of Alden's touch fading from my skin, replaced by a new, deeper chill. Kaelin Mordred. I'd heard the name in kitchen whispers, the ambitious, ruthless alpha of the Southern Territories, a man who viewed Alden's curse not as a tragedy, but an opportunity. The peace of the archives was shattered. The storm wasn't just inside Alden anymore. It was riding through the gates, and I was caught in the path of its freezing wind. The hunt was no longer just for my scent by a grateful king. Another, with colder intentions, had just entered the game. The Ironwood Keep didn't just change with Kaelin Mordred's arrival. It hardened. The very stones seemed to draw in, becoming colder, sharper. From my small, high window in the servants' wing, I watched the procession enter the main gates. There was no fanfare, only the grim, rhythmic clatter of hooves on black stone. Kaelin's men wore armor of darkened steel, unadorned and brutal, and at their head rode Kaelin himself. Even from a distance, he radiated a different kind of power than Alden. Where Alden's was like a deep, resonant mountain, ancient and unyielding, Kaelin's was a honed blade, cold, precise, and hungry. His hair was black as a raven's wing, his face all stark planes and calculating angles. His eyes, when they swept the courtyard, seemed to tally up weaknesses, assess fortifications, price every soul in silver.
I shivered and pulled back from the window. This was no social call. This was a predator entering another's den, and the air now tasted of ozone before a lightning strike. Life in the archives became a tense vigil. Master Fenwick, usually so detached, was nervous, his hands trembling as he sorted scrolls. The regular, precious rhythm of Alden's visits stopped. He was locked in counsel and strategy, in the delicate, deadly dance of royal hospitality with a wolf who wanted his throne. 3 days passed. The silence from the upper floors was a heavier burden than any noise. Then a summons came, but not from Alden. A guard in Mordred livery, not Valerius, stood at the archive door. His voice was flat, impersonal. "The Lady Ilara? Lord Alpha Kaelin Mordred requests your presence in the Sun Gallery." My blood turned to ice. Requests. The same dangerous word Alden had used, but this one held a threat in its teeth. How did he know my name? How did he know where to find me? Master Fenwick's eyes went wide with fear. I had no choice. The Sun Gallery was a long, bright room used for informal gatherings, its tall windows showcasing the intimidating peaks of Ironwood. Today, the sunlight felt sterile, exposing. Alden stood by the great fireplace, his posture rigid, every line of him broadcasting controlled fury. Kaelin stood opposite, near a window, as if admiring a view he intended to own. And between them, like a statue carved from ice, stood Lady Vivian. "Ah, the archivist," Kaelin said, turning as I entered. His voice was smooth, cultured, but it had the chill of a tomb. His gray eyes, the color of spent ashes, swept over me, and I felt utterly transparent. "Lady Vivian was just singing your praises, a foundling with a remarkable aptitude for ancient texts. How singular." Alden's jaw tightened. "Ilara's talents are a private matter of the keep." "Are they?" Kaelin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "In times of potential alliance, should not all of a kingdom's resources be known, even its quiet ones?" He took a step toward me, and I fought the urge to retreat. "Tell me, girl, in your studies, have you ever encountered the Verdantia Codex, a treatise on healing bonds between land and sovereign?" It was a test. The Verdantia Codex was a myth,
a fable mentioned in passing in a dozen texts as lost. He was probing, seeing how deep my aptitude went. "I have only seen it referenced, my lord," I said, keeping my eyes lowered, my voice meek. "It is said to be lost to time." "Pity," he murmured, circling me slowly. "A healer of old could have used such a text, could have, say, soothed a fractured spirit, stabilized a fluctuating nature." His gaze flicked to Alden, just for a second. The provocation was as subtle as a dagger to the ribs. Alden moved then, inserting himself subtly between Kaelin and me. "Theoretical history is of little use when discussing border tariffs and hunting rights, Kaelin. Shall we return to the map?" But Kaelin's attention was fixed on me. He inhaled deeply, almost discreetly. His ash-gray eyes narrowed a fraction. A spark of something, recognition, intrigue, avarice, lit their depths. He had caught my scent, not just soap and parchment, but the deeper note Alden had described, the clear water, the ancient stone. "Of course," Kaelin said, his smile returning, more dangerous now. "I apologize. I have a scholar's curiosity. It is a pleasure to meet you, Ilara. I am sure we will speak again." The dismissal was clear. I curtsied and fled, my heart a wild thing in my chest. As I reached the door, I heard Lady Vivian's voice, honeyed and poisonous. "Such a delicate creature to be among dusty books, Your Majesty. One wonders if a role in the gardens might be safer for her constitution." I didn't hear Alden's reply. I didn't need to. The trap was being set around me, with Vivian and Kaelin working the strings. That night, the dream returned, but twisted. Now I was the one running, the bundled blanket in my arms. But the wolf chasing me had ash-gray eyes, and its snarl was a voice that whispered, "He cannot protect you forever." I woke in a cold sweat, the echo of a howl, real or imagined, fading in my ears. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. A deep instinctive panic, older than reason, pulled me from my bed. I needed air. I needed to see the sky. Slipping from the dormitory, I wrapped myself in a thin shawl and crept through the silent, sleeping keep to a small, walled herb garden reserved for the kitchen. It was a place of mundane scents: thyme, rosemary, sage. It was safe. Or so I thought. The moment I pushed the wooden gate open, I knew I was not alone. A tall, dark figure stood silhouetted against the moon-washed wall, smelling of cold metal and ambition. Kaelin Mordred turned slowly. "Couldn't sleep, little healer?" he asked, as if we had an appointment. I froze, my hand on the rough wood of the gate. "My lord, I needed some mint for a headache." "A plausible lie," he said, stepping away from the wall. He moved with a predator's grace, closing the distance without seeming to hurry. "Why are you afraid of me? Or are you afraid of what I might see?" His gray eyes glinted in the dim light. "King Alden keeps you close, a rare jewel in his treasury. But jewels locked in a vault serve no purpose. They do not shine." "I am no jewel," I whispered, my back pressing against the gate. "Aren't you?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "I have studied the Valerius curse for years, a fascinating, brutal piece of magic. It makes a king vulnerable, it makes a kingdom unstable, and then a girl appears, a girl who calms the beast, a girl with the lost scent of the healers in her veins. Do you know what you are, Ilara? You are not a jewel, you are a key, and the man who holds the key controls the kingdom." His words were ice water in my veins. He saw it all. He understood exactly what I represented, not a person, but a weapon, a tool. "Alden would never use me like that," I said, finding a spark of defiance.
Alden is a dying man clinging to a miracle. His composure cracked for a second, revealing the ruthless hunger beneath. He is sentimental. He sees a savior, a companion. I see the truth. You are a solution. And in the world of wolves, solutions are taken, not gently received. He reached out, and his fingers, cold as a winter stream, brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. I flinched violently. Such power, wrapped in such fear, it's a waste. Come south with me. I can give you more than a dusty archive. I can give you a purpose worthy of your blood. You could be the power behind a throne that does not tremble. The offer was a corruption of everything Alden had made me feel. Alden spoke of balance, at peace. Kaelin spoke of power, of control. I belong here, I said, forcing the words out.
From the path I had come, a figure emerged into the murky moonlight. Alden. He was alone, dressed not in robes of state, but in dark, practical clothing. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his golden eyes burned with a fire that seemed to light the garden itself. He didn't look at me, not yet. His gaze was locked on Kaelin. "This is beyond diplomacy, Mordred." Alden's voice was low, a growl that vibrated in the pit of my stomach. "You trespass in my home. You threaten what is mine." "Threaten?" Kaelin spread his hands, the picture of reason affronted. "I am offering a future, one you cannot provide. You call her yours, Alden, but can you keep her safe? Look at her. She's trembling, not from the cold, but from the understanding of how fragile her position here truly is. The whispers, the scorn, the steward who watches her like a hawk. Is that your protection?" Alden's eyes finally flicked to me, and in that brief glance I saw a torrent of pain, apology, and fierce, unwavering possession. "Her safety is my sacred vow." "A vow is just words," Kaelin sneered. "Strength is action. I am acting. I am giving her a choice you never did. You simply assumed her destiny was tied to yours." He turned back to me, his voice softening into that false, persuasive tone. "Ilara, the choice is yours. Stay here in the shadow of a fading king, a target for every schemer in this court, or leave with me tonight. I have horses waiting at a postern gate. Come south, where you will be revered, not resented, where your gift is a crown, not a secret." The world narrowed to that impossible choice. Alden, who saw my soul, but whose house was crumbling around him. Kaelin, who saw only my utility, but offered a fortress. Alden took a step forward, his voice cracking with a raw emotion I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't a king's command. It was a man's plea. "Ilara, please, don't listen to him. What we have, what we are building, it's real. It's not about my curse. It's about the peace we find in each other, the silence after the storm. That is your true legacy. Not power, not thrones. Peace." His words struck the deepest chord. They reminded me of the archive's sunlight, the shared quiet, the feeling of being seen, not assessed. Kaelin offered a glorious purpose. Alden offered a home for my spirit. I looked at Alden, at the desperate hope in his eyes, at the strength he held in check. I thought of the dream of my mother, who fled from wolves like Kaelin to give me a chance at an ordinary life. She hadn't run towards power. She had run towards obscurity to save me. I took a deep, shuddering breath and turned to Kaelin. "My lord," I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You offer a gilded cage and call it a throne. King Alden offers me a place at his side and calls it a partnership. You see a key, he sees a person. My mother fled from your world to save me from being a pawn. I will not walk back into it willingly." The garden went utterly still. Kaelin's face drained of all false warmth, leaving only the cold, hard bone of his ambition. The mask was gone.
A sentimental fool, just like him, he hissed. You will regret this choice. When the chaos comes, you will beg for the protection you now refuse. Leave my kingdom, Alden commanded, his voice now ringing with absolute alpha authority. It was no longer a plea, but a decree that seemed to shake the very air. By sunrise, our negotiations are over. Kaelin looked between us, his gray eyes gleaming with pure hatred. He gave a short, sharp bow, more an insult than a gesture of respect. As you wish, Your Majesty. His gaze landed on me one last time, a promise of vengeance in its depths. This is not over, healer. You have chosen your side. See if it can hold when the ground gives way. He turned and melted into the shadows of the dead hedge, leaving Alden and I alone in the ruined garden. The moment he was gone, the fierce tension in Alden's posture shattered. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cradle my face. Ilara, are you hurt? Did he touch you? No, I breathed, leaning into his warmth, the solid reality of him. He just talked. He made his case. He threatened you, in my own home. The fury was back in Alden's eyes, but it was mixed with a profound, shaking relief. I found your note. I came as fast as I could. Vivian had guards delaying me at every turn. She's in his pocket. The confirmation was a cold shock. What do we do? We fight, he said simply, his thumb stroking my cheek. We stop hiding. Kaelin knows. The game is in the open now. From tomorrow, you are no longer a scribe's assistant. He took a deep breath, his gaze holding mine with terrifying intensity. Ilara, I would name you my royal lore keeper and personal advisor, a position of public trust and access. It will shield you with protocol and give you a voice. It will also put you directly in the line of fire, but I will be there, every step. It was a declaration of war, not just against Kaelin, but against the shadows in his own court. He was bringing me into the light. Consequences be damned. I'm afraid, I admitted, the truth a whisper in the dark. So am I, he said, and that admission made him seem more powerful, not less. But we are afraid together, and that makes all the difference. He leaned his forehead against mine, and in that quiet, ruined garden, with the threat of the southern wolf still lingering in the air, we made a silent vow. The hunt was on, but we would not be the prey. We would be the sanctuary each other needed, and the fortress no enemy could breach.
The path back would be dangerous, but for the first time I would not walk it alone. The announcement was made at Dawncourt, a sparse, tense gathering in the Great Hall. The news of Kaelin Mordred's abrupt departure had spread like a winter chill, and the nobility stood in uneasy clusters, their whispers a low, anxious hum. Lady Vivian stood at the foot of the dais, her face a perfect sculpture of composed neutrality, but her eyes were chips of flint. Alden did not sit on his throne. He stood before it, a pillar of grim authority. He wore the crown of ironwood, a simple, brutal circlet of black iron shaped like interlocking wolf-fangs. His voice, when he spoke, carried over the whispers and silenced them utterly. A threat has been made against the peace of this realm, he began, his golden gaze sweeping the hall, pausing for a heartbeat on Vivian. The southern wolf forgets that Ironwood's strength is not just in its walls, but in the wisdom it safeguards. In times of threat, we do not hide our treasures, we empower them. He turned slightly and extended a hand toward where I stood, just inside the great doors, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Approach, Ilara. Every eye in the hall turned to me. I felt their stares like physical blows, curious, hostile, calculating. I walked forward, the sound of my own footsteps deafening in the silence. The journey to the dais felt 1,000 miles long. When I reached him, Alden did not touch me, but his presence beside me was a fortress wall. This is Ilara. For her exceptional insight into ancient texts and the healing history of our land, I hereby name her Royal Lore Keeper of Ironwood. She will have full access to the archives and my private libraries.
Her counsel on matters of history, lineage, and the old magics will be sought and respected. She answers directly to me." A stunned silence held for 3 full seconds. Then the hall erupted, not in cheers, but in a wave of murmured shock and protest. A royal lore-keeper was a position that hadn't been filled in a century. It was an honor reserved for venerable scholars, not unknown young women from the kitchens. Lord Berenger, a barrel-chested alpha with lands to the east, stepped forward, his face red. "Your Majesty, with respect, this is unprecedented. A servant, given such access, such standing, it undermines the natural order." Alden's gaze sharpened. "The natural order nearly saw a foreign alpha lure a citizen of Ironwood from within these very walls last night, Lord Berenger. Perhaps the old order needs reassessing." His voice dropped, becoming dangerous. "My decision is made. This is not a subject for debate, but a declaration of royal will. You will accord the lore-keeper the respect her office demands." His tone left no room for argument. The lords bowed their heads, but the resentment in the air was a thick, sour perfume. Lady Vivian's bow was the deepest, the most graceful, and the most poisonous of all. When she rose, her eyes met mine, and in them was a promise. This changes nothing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new realities. I was given chambers, small but my own, with a window overlooking the inner ward instead of the midden heaps. I had a desk, proper inks, and a stack of blank journals. I also had a permanent shadow. Farron, Alden's grim-faced captain of the guard, assigned 2 of his most trusted men to discreetly guard my door and my steps. The protection was a comfort and a constant reminder of the danger. My new role was a strange, double-edged sword. In the archives, Master Fenwick now bowed to me, his fear replaced by a kind of awe. I could request any text, any scroll. I began to devour everything on the healer clans, on curses of division, on the politics of the purge. The story that emerged was tragic and clear. Fear had turned to hatred, and a gift of peace had been hunted to the edge of extinction. My very existence was an act of rebellion against that history. But outside the archives, I was a pariah. The servants who had whispered now fell into hushed silence when I passed. The noble ladies tittered behind their hands, calling me the king's pet scholar and the upstart lore maid. The isolation was a different kind of cold, one that seeped into the bones. Alden, burdened with reinforcing borders and managing the fallout from Kaelin's provocation, made time for me every evening. Our meetings moved from the public archives to a small private solar adjacent to his chambers. Here we were simply Alden and Alara. He would pore over military dispatches while I read aloud from my findings, connecting dots across centuries. One such evening, I made a breakthrough. I had been cross-referencing accounts of the purge with land grants from that era. "Alden," I said, my finger tracing a line on a crumbling map, "the family that led the charge against the healers in this region were granted vast tracts of forest north of here, lands that were said to be rich in moonbell flowers." He looked up from a report, instantly alert. "Moonbell? The flower your mother used in your dream? The one that enhances healing magic?" "The same," I said, excitement bubbling in my chest. "The records say the flowers there were blighted after the purge, that the groves died. But what if they didn't die? What if they were hidden, protected by the last of the healers? That land, it borders the territory of the Silent Sisters."
Alden stood, coming to look over my shoulder. The Silent Sisters were a reclusive, all-female monastic order, rumored to be keepers of old knowledge. They admitted no men, spoke to no outsiders. "A sanctuary," he murmured. "If your mother was fleeing hunters, she might have sought refuge with them before leaving you at the orphanage. They might know of her. They might have records." It was the first real, tangible lead to my cast. Hope, bright and fierce, blossomed in me. "We have to go there." "We cannot," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "The sisters admit no men, and I cannot leave the keep, not with Kaelin stirring trouble on the border. It would be seen as weakness, an invitation to attack. He saw my face fall and took my hand. His touch was always warm, always grounding. But you can. Me? Alone? Not alone. Theron and a full squad will escort you to the edge of their territory, but you must enter the Grove of the Sisters alone. It is their law. He squeezed my hand. It is a risk, a journey outside these walls, but it is a risk for answers, for your truth. I believe it is a journey you must take. The thought was terrifying, to leave the relative, if hostile, safety of the keep, to travel towards a mystery wrapped in silence, but the pull towards my mother's story, towards understanding my own blood, was stronger than the fear. "I'll go," I said. The planning was done in secret. Officially, the royal lore keeper was embarking on a research expedition to a remote monastic archive to study pre-purge agricultural techniques. A plausible, boring cover. Lady Vivienne was informed as steward, her lips pressing into a thin line as she approved the requisition for horses and supplies. Her eyes held a calculating light I didn't like. The night before my departure, Alden came to my chamber. He carried a small, velvet pouch. "I cannot go with you," he said, his voice rough with frustration and worry. "So take this." He emptied the pouch into my palm. It was a pendant on a fine silver chain. The pendant was a piece of polished, deep blue stone, like a chip of midnight sky, wrapped in delicate silver wire shaped like wolf fangs. It's a shard of Ironwood's heartstone, rare. It carries the essence of this place, of my bond to it, and to you. He fastened it around my neck. The stone felt cool against my skin, then warmed instantly, emitting a faint, comforting hum I felt more than heard. If you are in true danger, break it. I will feel it. I will come no matter the distance, no matter the cost. Tears pricked my eyes. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of his soul, a literal lifeline. "I'll be careful." "Be more than careful," he said, his hands resting on my shoulders. "Be brilliant. Be brave. Find your truth, Ilara, and then come back to me. This keep is empty without your quiet in it." He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The intensity in his eyes, the weight of the stone against my heart said everything. We stood like that for a long moment, two souls anchored against a gathering storm. At dawn, I rode out of the gates of Ironwood Keep with Theron and 9 of his most stoic guards. I wore a practical traveling cloak, the stone pendant hidden beneath my tunic. I did not look back, but I felt Alden's gaze on my back until we rounded the first bend in the mountain road. The journey was a descent from the stark granite beauty of the Ironwood peaks into the dense, whispering pine forests of the lower valleys. The air grew thicker, greener. Theron was a silent, watchful presence, his eyes constantly scanning the trees. The guards were respectful but distant. I was their charge, a strange, fragile cargo of royal importance. On the second day, we made camp in a sheltered grove. As I sat by the fire, trying to chew on hard travel bread, Theron sat down opposite me, his expression unreadable. "The men are loyal to the king, to the death," he said, abruptly, his voice a low rumble. "You should know that." "I never doubted it," I replied. He studied me for a long moment. "He is different since you came. The constant pain behind his eyes, it's less. He sleeps through the night now. That hasn't happened since he was a boy." He poked the fire with a stick. "Lady Vivienne and others, they see a disruption. I see a king finally able to draw a full breath. For that, you have my loyalty as well, Lore Keeper." The gruff acknowledgement from this hardened warrior meant more than 100 bows in the great hall. It was a flicker of warmth in the cold journey. On the third day, we reached the boundary stone, a moss-covered monolith carved with a symbol of a hooded figure holding a closed book. Beyond it, the forest changed. The pines gave way to ancient gnarled oaks and silver birch. The air was utterly silent. No bird call, no rustle of creatures. It was a silence of profound watchfulness. "This is as far as we can go," Theron said, reining in his horse. "Their territory begins here.
We make camp right here and wait. You have 3 days. If you do not return by sunset on the 3rd, he didn't finish, but his hand went to the hilt of his sword. I dismounted, my legs stiff. I carried only a small satchel with a water skin, a little food, and my mother's handkerchief. I looked down the path that wound into the silent, watchful wood. Thank you, Captain.
He gave a sharp nod. Godspeed, my lady. Taking a deep breath of the strange, still air, I stepped past the boundary stone. The moment I did, a subtle shift occurred. The forest ahead seemed to shimmer, like heat haze on a summer road. The path was clear, but the woods on either side became an impenetrable wall of mist and tangled branch. I was being allowed to walk one road, and one road only. The sisters knew I was here. With the heartstone warm against my skin and the ghost of my mother's desperate face in my mind, I walked forward, leaving the world of wolves and kings behind and into the realm of silent secrets. The silence in the sisters' wood was not an absence of sounds, but a presence. It was a dense, living quiet that pressed against my ears, filled with the scent of damp moss, blooming nightshade, and something older, the smell of time itself, patient and deep. The path, a ribbon of pale stone, guided me forward as the mist closed in behind, sealing me in this green, soundless world. I walked for what felt like hours, my own breathing and heartbeat the only company. The forest here felt watchful. I sensed eyes upon me, not with hostility, but with an intense, assessing curiosity. Finally, the oaks parted, revealing a clearing bathed in soft, dappled sunlight. In the center stood a grove of impossible trees, silver birches with bark that shimmered like liquid metal, their leaves whispering secrets in a breeze I could not feel. Between them stood simple stone cottages, thatched with living turf from which sprouted tiny blue flowers. And there were the sisters. They moved like shadows given form, gliding between the trees and cottages, dressed in robes of undyed gray wool. Their faces were hooded, but I caught glimpses of ageless features, serene and unreadable. None spoke, none made a sound. Their communication was a language of gestures, of glances, of the subtle rustle of cloth. A sister detached herself from the others and approached me. She was taller than the rest, her posture erect yet graceful. She stopped before me and lowered her hood. Her face was a map of fine lines, her eyes the color of a forest pool, deep, green, and knowing. She did not speak, but lifted her hands. In a graceful pantomime, she gestured to my satchel, then to my heart, then pointed towards the largest of the stone buildings, a low, round structure with a roof of living grass. Understanding her intent, I followed. The inside of the roundhouse was a single circular room. The air was cool and smelled of dried herbs and parchment. Sunlight streamed from the central opening in the roof, illuminating a simple stone table. The sister gestured for me to sit, then placed before me a clay cup of water and a small bowl of berries. Then she sat opposite, her hands folded in her lap, her green eyes fixed on me with unnerving focus. "Thank you," I said, my voice a jarring intrusion in the sacred quiet. She gave a slight, acknowledging tilt of her head, but did not speak. Instead, she reached into the sleeve of her robe and withdrew a smooth black stone slate and a piece of white chalk. On it, she wrote in elegant, flowing script, "Why have you come to the Silent Grove, daughter of Eliana?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Eliana. My mother had a name, a beautiful name. Tears sprang to my eyes, blurring the words. I fumbled in my satchel and pulled out the handkerchief, laying it on the stone table between us. The embroidered initials E.E. seemed to glow in the shaft of sunlight. The sister's eyes softened. She reached out a finger, not to touch the linen, but to trace the letters in the air above it. A sigh, silent but palpable, escaped her. She wiped the slate and wrote again. You have her eyes, the same storm gray, holding both sorrow and great calm. I am Sister Viridia. I knew her. A sob caught in my throat. Does she live? Sister Viridia's expression became one of profound sorrow. She shook her head slowly, then wrote, "She lived long enough to ensure you would. She was the last of the direct Ellsworth line. The hunters were relentless. She came to us, wounded in spirit and body, heavy with child, with you. She stayed just long enough to birth you, to recover her strength. She said the hunters tracked not just her, but the residents of her gift. The only way to save you was to sever the connection, to hide you where no magic lingered, in a place of plain stone and simple faith." She pointed to the handkerchief. "She left that so you would have a piece of her love and a clue for the day you were ready to seek your truth." The story unfolded in chalk dust words, a heartbreaking tapestry. My mother, Eliana, had been a beacon of the old healer magic. Her power was so strong it acted as a beacon to those who feared it. The purge, though officially over, was still carried in the hearts of certain noble lines, like the House of Frost, the very family granted the Moonbell lands. They believed any remnant of healer blood was a threat to the natural order of wolf dominance. The wolf in my dream with the angry eyes, was it a Frost? Sister Viridia nodded grimly. She wrote, "Lysander Frost. He led the hunt. He believed if he consumed a healer's heart, he would absorb their power and become invincible, a foul, ancient superstition. Your mother's light repelled him once, but he never stopped searching." My stomach churned. The violence of it, the hatred directed at something so beautiful as my mother's gift, was horrifying. And my father?
A gentle, almost smiling look came over Viridia's face. She wrote, "A good man. A wolf, yes, but of a small, peaceful pack from the western valleys. He loved her beyond reason. He died protecting her in an early attack. You are a child of both worlds, Alara. A bridge, as the oldest prophecies say." A bridge? The same word Alden had used. The pieces of my identity, once scattered, were slamming together with dizzying force. I was not just a healer. I was the last of my line, a bridge between wolf and healer, born of love and hunted by hate. Can you teach me?" I asked, my voice trembling with a new kind of yearning. "I feel this calm, this pull, but I don't know how to use it. The king, he says I soothe his curse, but it's instinct. I want to understand." Sister Viridia studied me for a long, silent moment. Then she stood, gesturing for me to follow. She led me out of the roundhouse and deeper into the grove, to a small, secluded spring. The water bubbled up from between the roots of the largest silver birch, collecting in a pool that reflected the sky like a perfect liquid mirror. She pointed to the pool, then to me, and made a drinking motion. I knelt, cupped my hands, and drank. The water was shockingly cold and sweet, and as it slid down my throat, a clarity washed over my mind. The constant low-grade anxiety I carried evaporated. I felt centered, rooted. Viridia then placed her hands on my shoulders, turning me to face the ancient tree. She placed my palm flat against its shimmering bark. "Listen," her intent seemed to whisper. At first, I felt only rough, cool bark. Then a vibration, slow, deep, rhythmic, the heartbeat of the tree. Then a whisper, not in words, but in sensations. Centuries of sunlight, the touch of rain, the resilience of deep roots against wind. A profound, peaceful vitality flowed into my palm, up my arm, and filled my chest. My own breath synced with the tree's slow pulse. I gasped, pulling my hand back. The connection broke, but the echo of that vibrant, silent life thrummed within me. Sister Viridia's eyes were shining. She wrote swiftly on her slate, "The gift is not about doing. It is about being open, being a conduit for the world's own healing energy. Your mother could encourage crops to grow, could ease a fever with a touch, could calm a frenzied animal. You soothed accursed Alsating because at your core you are a place of stillness. His curse is chaos. You are its opposite." She guided me through other exercises over the next 2 days.
I learned to feel the life force in plants, to sense the flow of energy in living things. I couldn't perform miracles, but I began to understand the mechanics of my own nature. The calm I brought wasn't magic. It was an alignment, a harmonic resonance that countered dissonance. On the evening of the second day, as we sat by the spring, a shadow fell over Sister Viridia's serene face. She wrote, "The southern wolf who came to Ironwood, Kalen Mordred. He is a different kind of danger. He does not wish to consume your power out of fear. He wishes to wield it as a weapon. He has been to the Frostlands. He seeks alliance." Dread coiled in my gut. Kalen and Lysander Frost? An alliance between cold ambition and ancient hatred? It was a nightmare. "You must return to your king," Viridia wrote, her strokes urgent. "He is strong, but he faces a pincer, the curse from within, and this new alliance from without. Your place is with him. You are his balance. And he," she paused, a faint knowing smile touching her lips, "he is your anchor. Do not fear the bond you feel. It is not a chain. It is a root system. It will allow you both to weather the coming storm." She gave me a final gift, a small linen pouch containing crushed leaves from the silver birch and a few dried moonbell petals. "For clarity and for strength of spirit," she wrote. As dawn broke on the third day, I stood at the edge of the grove, the boundary stone ahead. Sister Viridia stood beside me. She placed her hands on my shoulders and looked into my eyes. For the first time, she spoke aloud. Her voice was like the rustle of leaves, soft and husky from disuse. "The silent heart hears the deepest truth, child. You are Alara, daughter of Eliana. You carry the light. Now go and be the calm in the coming storm." She embraced me, a quick, fierce gesture, then pushed me gently towards the path. I walked back into the world of sound, the cry of a hawk, the wind in the pines, carrying my mother's name, the understanding of my gift, and a warning that chilled me to the bone. Theron and the guards were exactly where I'd left them, their relief palpable. "My lady," Theron said, eyeing my changed demeanor, the new stillness in my posture, the resolve in my eyes. "Did you find what you sought?" "I found where I come from, and I learned what I am. Now we need to ride. Ironwood is in more danger than we knew." As we mounted and turned our horses north, back towards the granite peaks, I was no longer just Alara the orphan, or Alara the lore-keeper. I was Alara, daughter of Eliana, the last healer of the Ellsworth line, and I was riding home to a king who needed my calm, and a kingdom that stood on the brink of a war fueled by both ancient hatred and cold new ambition. The silence of the grove was behind me. Ahead, the storm was waiting. The journey back to Ironwood Keep was a race against the dread coiling in my gut. The serene stillness of the grove was a memory buried under the thunder of hooves and the grim silence of Theron's men. Every rustle in the forest, every shadow crossing our path, felt like a herald of the alliance Sister Viridia had warned of. Kalen's cold ambition fused with Lysander Frost's ancient consuming hatred. When the black towers finally speared the gray sky ahead, my relief was sharp and short-lived. The keep didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a chessboard with the pieces already in motion. The guards at the gate saluted Theron, but their eyes flickered to me with a new, wary intensity. News traveled fast in a fortress. I went straight to the archives, not to my chambers. I needed the solidity of facts, the anchor of parchment and ink. But the moment I pushed open the heavy oak door, I knew something was wrong. The air, usually redolent of dust and beeswax, held a faint acrid taint. Master Fenwick wasn't at his high desk. The place was deserted. A cold finger traced my spine. I moved to the section on regional lineages, where I had left my notes on the Frost family and the Moonbell Groves. The shelf was in disarray. Several volumes were missing. And on the stone floor beneath, almost invisible, was a fine sprinkling of a pale, gritty powder. I knelt, careful not to touch it, and brought my face close. It smelled bitter, like burnt almonds in spoiled earth. My new heightened senses recoiled. This was no ordinary dust. It was a residue of something malign.
Looking for something, Lord Keeper? The voice, smooth as ice over ice, came from the doorway. Lady Vivian stood there, backlit by the corridor torches, her form a perfect, elegant silhouette. She glided into the room, her gaze sweeping over the disarray with feigned concern. "There's been a disturbance," I said, rising to my feet, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "A disturbance in the archives," she tutted softly, moving to the shelf and brushing her hand over the empty space. "How careless. Perhaps one of the cleaning girls knocked something over. I shall have words." Her gray eyes finally met mine. "And your expedition, I trust it was fruitful for your agricultural studies?" The lie of my cover story hung between us, thin and transparent. "It was enlightening," I replied, choosing my words with care. "I learned much about the blight that can affect even the most sheltered of groves. Blight is a persistent thing. It often requires the infected root to be burnt out completely to save the rest of the tree." She smiled, a chilling stretch of lips. "Welcome back, Alara. I'm sure the king is eager for your report." She left as silently as she had arrived, leaving the scent of frosty perfume and threat in her wake. I waited until her footsteps faded, then quickly gathered my remaining notes in the little pouch Sister Viridia had given me. I needed to see Alden, now. I found him in the strategy room, a map of the southern borders spread before him, weighted down with daggers. He looked up as I entered, and the wariness etched in his face momentarily vanished, replaced with a warmth that made my chest ache. "Alara, thank the goddess." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands coming up as if to grasp my shoulders, but he stopped himself, the public space imposing its rules. "You're unharmed."
"I am," I said, the words rushing out. "But Alden, we have no time. The sisters confirmed everything. My mother's name was Eliana. She was hunted by Lysander Frost, and Kaelin has been to the Frost lands. Sister Viridia believes they are forming an alliance." Alden's expression hardened into the mask of the warrior king. "Lysander Frost," he growled. "A bitter, backward-looking relic who clings to the hatreds of his ancestors. If he has joined with Kaelin," he slammed a fist on the table, making the daggers jump, "it explains the raids on my southern outposts. Not just probing strikes, but coordinated attacks. They're testing my strength, trying to pull my forces thin." "There's more," I said, lowering my voice. "The archives have been tampered with. Books on the Frost lineage and the old purge edicts are missing. And I found this." I showed him the tiny smear of bitter powder on my fingertip, careful not to let it touch my skin. Alden's nostrils flared as he leaned in to smell it. His golden eyes flashed with alarm. "Wolfsbane, refined and mixed with something else. Shadow root, perhaps. This isn't just poison, Alara. It's a specific, vicious concoction meant to agitate the wolf spirit, to induce rage and paranoia. A single dose in food or drink could make an alpha lose control, provoke an incident." His gaze snapped to mine, horror dawning. "My private kitchens, the springs that feed the keep? This is an inside attack, not a war yet, but a poisoning." The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about borders or thrones. This was about destroying Alden from within, making him appear unstable, cursed beyond control, unfit to rule. And who would be the first to restore order when the Mad King fell? Kaelin Mordred, with the blessing of a purge bloodline ally. "We have to find it," I said, my mind racing. "The source, if it's in the water." "The mainspring feeds the lower kitchens, the baths, the guards' barracks," Alden said, his mind working with strategic precision. "But my private supply comes from a separate, sealed cistern, fed from a higher, isolated source. It's supposed to be secure." His jaw tightened. Supposed to be. He summoned Theron with a sharp command. Within minutes, a discreet but thorough operation began. Trusted guards, those whose families had served the Valerius line for generations, were tasked with securing and testing all water sources.
The public wells were to be declared under maintenance, but the true mission was to find the source of contamination. For the next 2 days, the keep lived under a surface of tense normality, while beneath, a silent hunt raged. I returned to the archives, not to study, but to investigate. Using Sister Viridia's teachings, I tried to extend my senses, to feel for the discordant, sickly energy of the poison. It was like trying to hear a single sour note in a symphony of stone and old paper. I felt nothing but my own frustration. The break came from an unexpected source. A young kitchen boy named Peter, with wide, fearful eyes, sought me out in the herb garden, where I was pretending to study medicinal plants. He clutched a grimy cloth bundle to his chest. "Milady Lorekeeper?" he stammered, looking around furtively. I found something in the old ice cellar, behind the broken shelves. I didn't touch it, but it smells like the bitter medicine my gran took before she died, only worse." My heart leapt into my throat. "Show me, quietly." The old ice cellar was a disused, dripping cavern deep beneath the kitchens. Peter led me to a collapsed stack of broken casks and pointed a trembling finger. Tucked behind the rubble were 3 large, sealed clay jars. The acrid, almond-spoiled earth smell was unmistakable, leaking from a hairline crack in one lid. "You did well, Peter, very well," I said, my voice calm despite the chill coursing through me. "Now, go straight to Captain Theron, tell him exactly what you told me, and bring him here. Tell no one else. Can you do that?" He nodded vigorously and scurried away. I didn't wait. I needed Alden. I found him in the training yard, sparring with 2 guards. Sweat gleamed on his torso, and the controlled power of his movements was a sight to behold. When he saw my face, he immediately stopped, dismissing the guards with a curt wave. "The ice cellar," I breathed, as soon as we were alone. 3 jars. It's there." His eyes went flinty. He barked an order, and within minutes, Theron, a handful of his most trusted men, and a grim-faced castle alchemist were assembled. We descended into the dank chill. The alchemist, a thin man with stained fingers, carefully opened one jar. The smell that wafted out was so potent that it made our eyes water. He dipped a glass rod, examined the oily, dark residue, then sealed the jar again, his face pale. "Your Majesty, it is as you feared. A concentrated tincture of refined wolfsbane and shadow root. A few drops in a water source would be enough to cause targeted agitation over time. This amount?" He gestured to the 3 jars. "This could poison the main aquifer for a month. It would cause widespread frenzy, not just in you, but in every wolf in the keep. It would be a massacre." The horror of the plot unfolded in that dripping cellar. It wasn't just regicide, it was the destruction of the entire Valerius bloodline and its loyalists in one horrific stroke, making it look like the curse had finally erupted catastrophically. "Who has access?" Alden's voice was deathly quiet.
Farron consulted a mental list. "The cellar has been unused for years. Only the head steward's keys unlock it now. And the weekly inventory check, that is done by the steward's office." The steward. Lady Vivian. Alden turned, his movement a study in contained violence. "Bring her. Now." But Lady Vivian was not in her chambers, not in the great hall, not in any of her usual haunts. She had vanished. A search of her rooms revealed little, clothes, jewels, all in place. But in a hidden compartment of her writing desk, they found a single crumpled piece of parchment. It was a map, not of Ironwood, but of the southern passes leading to the Frost territories. And scrawled in the margin in her elegant hand was a phrase: "The spring is poisoned, the wolf will howl, the throne will be empty for the taking." She was gone, fled to her allies, her work of sabotage complete. Alden stood in the center of her ransacked room, the note in his hand. The betrayal was a physical blow. She was my father's trusted steward. She helped raise me after my mother left. The pain in his voice was raw. "And she sold my kingdom for a promise from Kaelin." "The jars are found," Theron said, practical as ever. "The poison is contained. We have flushed the cisterns. The immediate threat is over." "No," I said, the clarity from the sisters' spring sharp in my mind. "The immediate threat is just beginning. She's fled to tell them their sabotage failed. They know we're onto them. They won't wait for another slow poison. Kaelin will come, and he'll bring Lysander Frost and his hatred with him." Alden crumpled the note in his fist. The grief on his face hardened into something unbreakable. He looked at me, and in his golden eyes, I saw the storm finally break free of its chains. Not the cursed storm of division, but the righteous storm of a king defending his home. "Then let them come," he said, his voice a low thunder that filled the silent room. "We have the high ground, we have loyal hearts, and we have something they do not." He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm, warm, an anchor in the rising gale. "We have the truth, and we have each other. Ready the keep, Theron. We go to war." The silence after the battle was more deafening than the clash of steel. In the courtyard, Mordred's soldiers knelt in surrender, their weapons a heap of discarded teeth. Lysander Frost lay bound and unconscious, a prisoner of his own failed hatred. On the walls, the remaining Frost hunters had melted away into the mountains like morning mist, their will broken with their leader's fall. But the victory was ashes in my mouth. All I could see was Alden. He stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily, his armor stained and dented. The fearsome war alpha was gone. In his place was a man trembling on the precipice of an internal abyss. The battle rage, the surge of violence, had acted like a bellows to the embers of his curse. I saw it in the way his knuckles were white around his sword hilt, in the fine tremor that ran through his arms, and in the gold of his eyes that flickered like a guttering candle between human awareness and feral torment. "Secure the prisoners, tend the wounded. Theron, you have the wall," he ground out, each word clipped, forced through a tightening throat. He didn't look at anyone as he turned and strode toward the inner keep, his gait stiff, purposeful, a direct line away from the crowd. He was fleeing, not from the enemy, but from himself. I didn't hesitate. I followed him, my own legs shaky, the echo of that strange silver light still humming in my veins. The guards at the doors to his tower took one look at his face and mine and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the climb up the spiral staircase was a journey into a gathering tempest. I could feel the energy coming off him in waves, a wild, chaotic pressure that made the torches in their sconces gutter. He didn't go to his formal chambers. He headed for the ruined room where our story had begun, the place of his deepest shame and his first glimpse of peace. He reached the antechamber and stopped, his back to me, shoulders heaving. "Leave, Alara." The command was a rasp, torn from a place of agony. "No." The word was quiet, but absolute. He whirled, and I took an involuntary step back. The transformation was beginning in earnest. Claws were fully extended from his fingertips, dark and sharp. The bones in his face shifted beneath sweat-sheened skin, and his eyes were pure, blazing gold, the human mind within fighting a desperate losing battle. "You don't understand," he snarled, the voice layered with a bestial growl. "The battle, the blood, it's woken it all up. It's stronger than it's ever been. I can't hold it back. I could hurt you. I will hurt you. Get out!" He hurled the last words with such force that a small side table splintered against the far wall. It was a display of terrifying power, meant to scare me away. It had the opposite effect.
The fear in my heart crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. This was the storm. This was the poison spring at its source, raging and overflowing. And I was the calm. It was the reason I existed. "I won't," I said, and took a step forward, then another. "You're fighting it, Alden. You're trying to cage it. That's what makes it rage." "What would you have me do?" he roared, backing away from me as if I were the danger. "Embrace it? Let the wolf take me? That's what the curse wants." "No," I said. My voice found a steadiness I didn't feel. I remembered Sister Viridia's words by the silver birch. The gift is not about doing. It is about being open.
I was close to him now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to smell the wild, earthy scent of his wolf mixed with the sweat and iron of battle. His chest was heaving, his claws twitching. The beast was right there, at the surface, poised to strike. "I am not afraid of you," I whispered, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. I wasn't afraid of the wolf. I was afraid of the pain it caused him. Slowly, holding his tormented gaze, I reached out my hand, not in the gesture I'd used in the courtyard, but simply offering my open palm to him. He stared at my hand as if it were a snake, a salvation, a torment. A low, pained whine escaped him. "Lara, please, stop fighting," I breathed. "Just for a moment, stop." I took the last step, closing the distance. My palm came to rest lightly, fearlessly against the center of his chest, over the frantic, pounding rhythm of his heart. At the touch, he jerked, as if scalded, a full-bodied flinch, but he didn't pull away. I closed my eyes. I didn't try to push my will, my calm, into him. I didn't try to heal or fix. I simply opened myself. I let myself feel the chaos within him, the roaring, wounded fury of the wolf, the desperate, noble resistance of the man, two magnificent forces tearing each other apart, and beneath it all, the deep, aching loneliness that had been there since the day he was born. I accepted it all. I held it in my awareness, without judgment, without fear. I became a still pool reflecting the storm, not trying to stop the wind, just letting it be. And something shifted. The violent trembling in his body began to slow. The pained snarls quieted to ragged breaths. I felt the frantic pounding of his heart begin to steady, to find a slower, deeper rhythm. I opened my eyes. His own eyes were closed. The claws were retracting. The terrible tension in his jaw was easing. He was still caught between forms, powerful, otherworldly, more than human, but the war had ceased. The two sides weren't merged, but they had ceased their battle. They were simply coexisting, a king and his wolf, standing together in a fragile, awe-inspiring truth. He opened his eyes. They were still gold, but the wildfire was gone, replaced by a deep, molten warmth, full of a wonder so profound it stole my breath. He looked down at my hand, still pressed to his heart, then back at my face. "How?" The single word was a reverent whisper. "You stopped seeing it as a war. You let it be what it is. A part of you, not a curse, but a strength that was twisted into pain." I slowly lowered my hand. The division was the curse, Alden, not the wolf. He stood there, utterly still, as if feeling his own being for the first time. He flexed his hands, human hands. He took a deep, shuddering breath, one that seemed to reach the very bottom of his lungs. The wild energy in the room had dissipated, replaced by a profound, exhausted peace. "For 32 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have lived in a prison of my own flesh. Every year, the walls closed in. I thought my only hope was to find the one who could break the walls down." He took a step closer, his gaze holding me with an intensity that felt like sunlight. "But you didn't break the walls, Alara. You showed me there was no prison. The door was never locked. I was just afraid to walk through it." Tears spilled down my cheeks, tears of relief, of shared pain, of a joy so fierce it was almost painful. "You're not alone in it anymore." No, he agreed, and the ghost of a smile, the first true, unburdened smile I had ever seen on his face, touched his lips. It transformed him. He reached out then, and with a tenderness that made my heart ache, he wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric, a seal on everything that had just passed between us. It was a connection deeper than any physical bond, a joining of spirits that had fought separate battles and found their way home in each other. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect in the quiet of the ruined room. It was broken by a polite but urgent cough from the doorway. Theron stood there, his face a mask of professional concern, though his eyes held a flicker of awe. "Your Majesty, the prisoners are secured. Lord Frost is awake and demanding, and Kaelin Mordred's main host is still camped beyond the ridge. They've seen their allies break. They're not advancing, but they're not leaving either." The world, with all its messy problems, came crashing back in. But it was a different world. Alden drew himself up. The peace in his eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by a new, unshakable certainty. He was whole, and a whole king was a formidable thing. "Bring Lysander Frost to the Hall of Judgment," Alden said firmly, clear, and utterly in command. "And send a rider to Kaelin Mordred. Tell him he is invited to parley, not under a flag of truth, but under the witness of the moon, to answer for his treason. Tell him he may bring 2 guards, no more." Theron bowed deeply. "At once, Your Majesty." He shot me a look of profound respect before departing. Alden turned to me. The wariness was still there, but it was a clean wariness, not a fracturing one. "Will you stand with me?" he asked. "Not behind me, with me." I took his offered hand, lacing my fingers with his. The connection was solid, real, a promise. Always. The storm within had been calmed. Now we had to face the storm without. But for the first time, we would face it not as a cursed king and his healer, but as 2 halves of a single, unbreakable will. The Hall of Judgment was not the Great Hall. It was a smaller, older chamber deep in the heart of the keep, its walls lined not with tapestries, but with carved stone panels depicting the ancient laws of the wolf-kind. A single high window allowed a shaft of cold moonlight to fall like a blade onto the dais where Alden's seat of judgment, a simple, massive chair of black ironwood, stood. The air here was not for feasting or celebration. It was for truth and for consequences. I stood not on the dais, but to the right of the throne. I wore a simple gown of deep gray, the color of twilight, and the heartstone pendant rested visibly against my chest. I wasn't a prisoner, not a servant, not a hidden scholar. I was the royal lore-keeper, and my presence was a statement. The past would bear witness.
The hall was packed but silent. The surviving nobility of Ironwood, the captains of the guard, the heads of the household, all stood in solemn ranks. The scent of blood and smoke still clung to some of them. At the center of the floor, flanked by 4 stone-faced guards, stood Lysander Frost. He had been cleaned of battle grime, but nothing could clean the hatred from him. It simmered in his ice-blue eyes, in the rigid set of his shoulders. His hands were bound before him with silver-chased manacles, symbols of his crimes against the natural order he claimed to uphold. A fanfare of horns announced Alden's arrival. He entered not in armor, but in the regal black and silver of the Valerius line, the iron fang crown upon his brow. But it was not the clothing that commanded the silence. It was the man. He moved with a new, profound certainty. The shadow of internal agony that had always haunted His Majesty was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant calm. He was the mountain itself, unshakable. He took his seat, his golden gaze sweeping the room before settling on the prisoner. "Lysander of the House Frost," Alden's voice filled the stone space, clear and without malice. "You stand accused of treason against the crown of Ironwood, of waging unprovoked war, of conspiring to poison this keep and its people, and of the attempted murder of your sovereign. The evidence of your alliance with the traitor Kaelin Mordred and the saboteur Vivienne is before this court. How do you answer?" Frost's lip curled. He did not bow. "I answer that I serve a higher law than yours, cursed king.
the law of purity, the law that says the blood of witches and healers is a blight upon the world of wolves. I hunted the Ellsworth line to its end to cleanse our kind, and I would do it again. You pervert our nature by sheltering the last abomination." His venomous eyes flicked to me, and I met his gaze without flinching. "She is a disease. You are infected by her. Your curse is the goddess's punishment for your weakness." A murmur of anger rippled through the hall. Alden held up a hand, and it silenced. "The only disease in this hall is your hatred, Lysander," Alden said, his tone chillingly even. "A hatred so old it has fossilized your heart. You speak of purity, yet you allied with a southern opportunist who cares nothing for your ancient grievances, only for throne. You have become the very tool of opportunism you claim to despise." "Mordred is a means to an end," Frost spat. "And you were a means to his," Alden countered. "He used your antique bigotry to weaken me. Your purpose, in his eyes, is served. He has abandoned you to this judgment." He leaned forward slightly. "The purge you glorify was a season of madness and fear. It nearly destroyed the wisdom that allows our kind to live in balance with this land. Ilara of the Ellsworth line is not a blight. She is the return of that wisdom. She is proof that what you tried to destroy is stronger than your hate." He rose from his throne and descended the dais steps, stopping a few paces from Frost. The power radiating from Alden was not aggressive, it was absolute, a force of nature. "My curse," Alden continued, and the hall hung on his every word, "was not a punishment, it was a lesson in division, and it has been healed not by force, but by the very abomination you sought to kill. The lesson is learned, Lysander. Division is the true curse. Unity is our strength. You have failed." For the first time, a crack appeared in Frost's fanatical armor. Doubt, confusion, and a dawning horror that his entire life's purpose was based on a lie flickered in his eyes. Alden's wholeness, his peace, was the most powerful evidence against him. "The penalty for your crimes is death," Alden stated, the words final as a falling stone. The hall held its breath. "But a death fueled by more hatred only continues the cycle you began." He turned and looked at me. It was a question. I gave a single slight nod. We had spoken of this. Alden turned back. "Lysander Frost, you are stripped of your titles, your lands, and your pack. You will be taken to the border of the Silent Sisters' Grove. You will be given into their custody to live out your days in silence and contemplation. Perhaps in the quiet, away from the echoes of old hatreds, you will learn to hear a different truth. If you ever step foot from their sanctuary with malice in your heart, the sentence will be carried out. This is my judgment." It was not the vengeance Frost expected. It was mercy, but a mercy harder than steel, to be given to the very guardians of the knowledge he hated, to live in the perpetual gentle quiet that would mock his rage every single day. It was a fate worse than death for a man like him. He sagged, the fight draining from him, replaced by a hollow, bewildered defeat. The guards led him away. The judgment was done. No sooner had the horns sounded again than the horns sounded again. "Kaelin Mordred, Alpha of the Southern Territories, answers the summons." Kaelin entered with 2 of his warriors. He wore traveling clothes, not armor, a show of false nonchalance. His ash-gray eyes took in the solemn assembly, the unbroken king on his dais, and me standing firm. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed his face. He had expected a shattered man, a weakened court. He found a fortress. "King Alden," he said, executing a perfectly measured bow, "you requested my presence." "I did," Alden replied, remaining seated. "You are accused of treason, of conspiracy, of waging war upon a sovereign realm. You have seen your ally judged. Do you have anything to say before judgment is passed upon you?" Kaelin's smile was thin. "I see a king who has won a battle.
I congratulate you, but the war of perception is longer. I came because a sovereign neighbor was clearly unwell. His kingdom was unstable, a danger to itself and the surrounding territories. My actions, however, direct, were those of a concerned neighbor seeking to restore order. By poisoning my wells, by smuggling a saboteur into my household, by allying with a fanatic to murder an innocent woman? Alden's voice remained calm, which made his words all the more devastating. The methods of statecraft are often unpleasant, Kaelin shrugged. The result is what matters, and the result I see is a king seemingly restored. Perhaps my intervention provided the necessary pressure for a resolution. His gaze slid to me, calculating. The healer appears well, a happy outcome for all. The gall of it took my breath. He was reframing his invasion as a therapeutic intervention. Your intervention cost lives, I said, my voice ringing clear in the hushed hall. All eyes turned to me. It cost trust. It was born of ambition, not concern. You saw a crack and tried to hammer a wedge into it, not mend it. Kaelin's eyes narrowed at my direct address. The little lore-keeper finds her voice. How charming! But, child, you understand nothing of the burdens of rule, of the difficult choices. I understand a choice between building and breaking, I interrupted, stepping forward. The heartstone felt warm against my skin. You chose to break. You saw a man in pain and saw a weakness to exploit. You saw a gift of peace and saw a weapon to wield. Your vision is barren, Lord Mordred. It creates nothing but ashes. A ripple of agreement, low and fierce, went through the Ironwood nobles. I had given voice to their contempt.
Alden stood. Ilaris speaks the truth you will not acknowledge, Kaelin. Your ambition has no soul. It is a desert, and I will not let that desert spread to my borders. He paused, letting the weight of the moment build. You will withdraw every one of your soldiers from Ironwood territory. You will pay a blood price in silver and grain to the families of those who fell in your attack. And you will sign a binding treaty witnessed by the Moon Goddess, swearing non-aggression for 50 years. Your southern border will be patrolled by my guards as well as yours for a decade to ensure compliance. Kaelin's composure finally cracked. You would dare to impose such terms? To station your troops on my land? I would, said Alden, his tone leaving no room for debate. Or you can refuse, and I will ride south with the army you have seen defend this keep. An army led by a king who is no longer divided, an army that knows it fights for a just and whole cause. Choose, Kaelin, reparations and peace, or a war you cannot win, against a unity you cannot break. The fight hung in the moonlit air. Kaelin looked from Alden's unyielding face to the resolute faces of the lords around him. To me, he saw no fracture to exploit, no hidden doubt. He saw a kingdom that had been tempered in fire and had emerged stronger, bound together by a truth he could not manipulate. The fight drained from him, replaced by the cold calculation of a gambler who knows the game is lost. The cost of war now outweighed the potential gain. He lowered his head, not in respect, but in bitter concession. I accept your terms, King Alden. The words were a victory sweeter than any battlefield triumph. It was a victory of integrity over ambition, of wholeness over division. The treaty will be drawn before sunrise. You are dismissed. As Kaelin turned and walked from the hall, a defeated shadow of the arrogant wolf who had arrived days before, a collective exhale seemed to lift the very stones of the keep. It was over. Alden descended the dais and came to my side. He did not take my hand in front of everyone, but he stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, as the assembly bowed to their king. Later, on the battlements where the scent of conflict still lingered, we watched the moon rise, full and brilliant over the healed kingdom. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "We were," I corrected, looking up at him. "You judged with justice and mercy. I spoke the truth we both knew. It was the balance." He smiled, that true, unburdened smile that still made my heart stutter. "The balance," he agreed. He looked out over his lands, peaceful under the moon. "The storm has passed." "A new day comes," I whispered. And for the first time in both our lives, we faced the dawn not with fear, but with a quiet, unshakable hope, together.
"The anniversary of the blood moon approaches," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But it feels different this year. It feels like a birthday, a true one." "It will be," I said, feeling a surge of certainty, the first of the new legacy, not of a curse, but of your reign as a whole king. He nodded, but a flicker of something uncertain crossed his face. "Alara, this new legacy, it cannot be mine alone. A king's legacy is tied to his future, to his line." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "For so long, I believed I had no future. Now the future seems vast, and I find I do not wish to face it alone. I do not wish to build it alone." My breath caught. I knew what was coming, not as a demand, but as a question that had grown in the quiet between us for weeks. He turned from the window and came to kneel before my chair, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to the woman who had remade his world. He took my hands in his golden eyes holding mine with a tenderness that made my heart feel too large for my chest. "Alara, daughter of Eliana, last of the Ellsworth line, my balance and my peace," he began, his voice low and fervent. "You saw the monster and called forth the man. You walked into the storm and became its calm. You have given me back my soul, and in doing so, you have given this kingdom back its heart. I love you, not because I need you to survive, but because my soul recognizes its home in yours." He reached into the folds of his tunic and pulled out a small, worn velvet pouch, the same one that had held the Heartstone pendant. From it, he drew not a jewel, but two simple, perfect bands, forged of a single metal. One was dark as ironwood, streaked with a vein of silver. The other was bright silver, streaked with a vein of dark iron. They were two halves, distinct, yet made of the same stuff, designed to fit together. "These were my mother's," he said, his thumb tracing the bands. "She left them behind. I think she always hoped I would find the one to give them to, the one who would understand that strength is not in being hard like iron or pure like silver, but in being an alloy, stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful together." He held up the darker band. "This is the strength of the wolf, the resilience of the mountain." He held up the lighter one. "This is the clarity of the healer, the peace of the moon on still water." He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Alara, will you build this new legacy with me, not as my healer or lore keeper, but as my partner, my equal, my queen? Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of a joy so profound it felt like a new kind of magic. I saw it all. Not a crown, but a partnership. Not a gilded cage, but a shared throne. A life of purpose, of love, of building something beautiful from the ashes of both our pasts. I slid from the chair to kneel with him, our eyes level. I took the darker band from his hand and the lighter one. "Alden, son of Valerius, my king and my anchor," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "You saw the orphan and called forth a woman of lineage and worth. You gave me a name, a home, and a faith in myself I never dreamed possible. My soul found its harbor in you the moment I stepped into your storm. Yes, 1,000 times yes, I will marry you. I will build this legacy with you. I will be your queen." With hands that shook, we exchanged the rings. The dark band settled on my finger,
cool and weighty, a promise of his steadfast strength always with me. The silver band slid onto his finger, a symbol of the peace we would guard together. As the bands touched our skin, a warm, gentle pulse passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they sealed. He pulled me into his arms then, and we held each other, kneeling on the stones before the fire, two orphans who had finally, miraculously, found their family in each other. The announcement was made the next morning. The reaction in the great hall was not the shocked silence of my first appointment, but a roar of approval that shook the rafters. The people had seen us together. They had felt the change in their king. They knew the story of the healer who had calmed the curse. This was not a scandal. It was the perfect, hopeful ending to a long, dark tale. It was the promise of a strong, united line for Ironwood. The wedding was not a grand affair of state, but a solemn, joyful ceremony held in the oldest grove within the keep walls, under the budding branches of the first trees of spring. We swore our vows not just to each other, but to the kingdom, under the witness of the moon goddess and the assembled packs. Farron stood as Alden's witness. A shy, beaming Peter, clutching a basket of silver birch leaves, stood as mine. As the high priestess bound our hands with a cord woven from ironwood vine and moonbell stems, declaring us Alpha and Luna, king and queen, a single pure note seemed to hang in the air, a note of perfect harmony. Later, standing together on the highest balcony as the stars emerged, Alden's arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder, we looked over our kingdom. "It's so quiet," I murmured. "It's not quiet." His voice was a contented rumble against my ear. "Listen." I did. I heard the distant sounds of the feast in the hall below. I heard the wind in the pines. I heard the steady, strong beat of his heart under my hand. It was the sound of life, of peace, of a future being born. "I hear it," I said, smiling. "I hear our new beginning." He turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my face. In his eyes, I saw not just love, but a boundless, shared horizon. "This is just the dawn, my Alara. The story of Ironwood has a new chapter now, and we will write it together." And as the moon rose, full and benevolent, bathing the healed land in its soft light, we knew it was true. The hunt was over. The storm had passed, and in the clear, bright dawn that followed, a king and his queen stood ready, their hands joined, their hearts one, to build a legacy of peace that would echo through the ages.